Ready, ready, ready. Welcome everybody to live Q&A. Hopefully we actually are live.
Yes.
There we go. Hey, I am Pastor Dave, and with me is Recovering Heretic Dan.
Yes.
So, hi, Dan.
Hi. And I'm going to be probably annoyingly heretical today.
Okay.
So, because we're going to do like a hubbub of miscellany on Christmas.
Okay.
But a lot of it focusing on the discrepancies. You know, even in the official Bible,
Yeah.
it doesn't really agree on Christmas and the
Canon
nativity.
doesn't agree.
Yeah, canon doesn't agree, right? This is the thing that drives me crazy in fiction, right? When they violate their own canon,
Yeah.
and the Bible does it right and left.
Bible does it right and left. Bible doesn't. God doesn't really care. He's not a strict canonist.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and it bothers me.
Logical consistency is not one of God's defining characteristics.
Yeah, so you know, I'm going Platonic, and where logic is the very essence of God.
No.
You go for that love thing.
Yeah. Mercy, love, forgiveness, all that good stuff.
Logic's the way to go.
Yeah.
So let's start very broadly.
Yep.
Why don't Mark or John mention Christ's birth at all?
I mean, the short answer, each gospel has an agenda. And so John has the prologue, actually, which is sort of a birth narrative, if you want to, in the beginning was the Word. Mm-hmm. The Word was with God,
Yeah, but that...
It's not he doesn't need a birth narrative because he's got that,
he's got I don't even know what you would call that. It's not an incarnation. Jesus is there from the beginning.
Yeah, we call it it's called the prologue. Meditation on the Word, how Jesus is the Word made flesh. He's literally the Logos, the undergirding logical principle of the whole universe.
Logical principle. See, there you go. I can buy that.
Right, made flesh, is or the undergirding Word that sustains the whole universe is embodied in Jesus, and that's what John wants you to know.
So the physical incarnation isn't that big of a deal.
It is
in that respect.
It is a huge deal, but it's a huge deal because it is the pre-existing Word.
Yeah.
Made flesh, right? Like that's why the incarnation's a huge deal.
But the actual incident of it, that 9 months in.
Right. He does. The birthday itself doesn't make a difference, but the incarnation is a huge deal.
Yeah.
John has a lot of different things. He just goes about the story differently. Mary isn't actually ever mentioned by name in John's gospel. Okay. She's just his mother in chapter 2. So like he's just not very. It's just not on his radar as an important detail in the story. It's not part of, again, his agenda, right? Mark, similarly, his agenda, Mark wants you to know Jesus was crucified. Mm-hmm. Like that, that's what he wants you to know. It is the action movie gospel. And so if it is not getting you to the crucifixion,
then it doesn't matter.
He does not give a damn. Like just straight to the crucifixion. The crucifixion story takes up the same number of chapters in Mark's gospel as it does the other gospels, even though it's about half the length.
Oh, wow.
So percentage-wise, it actually takes up far more of Mark's gospel than any of the other gospels, which tells you, for Mark, Jesus is the crucified Messiah. He barely has time for Easter, much less Christmas. Like
it's the crucifixion itself.
It is the crucifixion itself, which marks Jesus as the Messiah, and by God, he's going to get you there as fast as possible. And so to that end, John the Baptist just pops on the scene. Jesus just pops on the scene with John the Baptist, and we're off to the races.
So Mark is the diehard of the Gospels.
Yeah, I mean, It's an action movie pared down to its absolute essence, and not much else. As little character development as you really need.
Wow.
So
that's cool. I think we'll circle back on that for our Easter edition.
Yeah. So that's why they don't have anything about it. It's just not crucial to their agenda in telling their gospel.
So what makes the nativity crucial to Matthew and Luke's agenda? What were their agendas, and why did that play in then?
Luke is aiming, I guess, first for like a much fuller like ancient biography, than like the other two are. So like, so toward that end, you have the miraculous birth story, which is a kind of common trope in the ancient world,
Yeah.
For Luke also, Luke's story is all about how the Messiah subverts the established powers of the world, and so towards that end, the Christmas story begins. Luke wants you to know right from the beginning, like we've already entered subversion territory of, the Magnificat that Mary sings is like the thesis statement.
Oh, for Luke.
Of what the Messiah's work is, and so the lowly are lifted up, the powerful are cast down, the hungry are fed, the well-fed go away empty,
Yeah, so we get that at the beginning, and then details to come in the following.
Right, details to be lived out in this ministry for the rest of the book, and so the birth narrative for Luke's functions as this kind of thesis statement for the whole book, So Christmas story itself starts with Emperor Augustus and Quirinius. You're working your way on down from, Emperor Augustus, the most powerful man in the whole world, to Quirinius, who's governor of the most important province in the empire, to, but where you end up is not in Jerusalem or not in Rome or not in Antioch, but in
this little town of Bethlehem.
Little Bethlehem, right? Like, and that's the nature of, and Luke's going to be doing that reversal the whole way through his gospel,
So what about Matthew? What's his thing with the nativity?
Matthew is very concerned that in proving that Jesus is the promised Messiah as foretold by the Old Testament, and the fulfillment of the law, and that.
So was Matthew's congregation a traditionally Jewish congregation? Is that why?
Probably more Jewish than like Mark's, which was primarily probably Gentile. You can kind of tell this. Mark's congregation is almost certainly Roman, and they're probably Gentile, and you can tell because Mark explains every Jewish term, but never explains a single Roman term. So like. He doesn't explain what a legion is, whereas some of the other Gospels do, but so he assumes what the Roman terms all are. He assumes what a centurion is, what a legion is, He does not assume why Jews don't eat pork, or stuff like that, right? Like so, whereas Matthew is just the whole time, everything's a prophecy, so it's like every 2 words, Matthew's like, this is to fulfill the prophecy that was spoken by, and he'll quote some random bit of the Old Testament, and then you'll go back and check that, and you'll be like, in context, you'll be like, I'm not sure that's a prophecy, Matthew. But he's very concerned he is the promised Messiah as foretold by the Old Testament, and fulfills the law.
So that's his obsession.
Right. And so
what about the birth then fulfills
well,
prophecy
so he
in Matthew's
starts with
eyes?
his genealogy, right, of Jesus. So he is in line with David, right? He is the promised Messiah, kingship from David, and from there you get the Joseph, and he tells the story from Joseph's perspective, not Mary's, right? So that's and so you get Joe, who is told, stay married to Mary, you're going to have a kid. You then get the coming of the wise man, which is this fulfillment from the book of Isaiah, of how the kings of the nations shall come to Israel, in the time of the messianic reign, and so you get the story of the wise men, and then you get the story of the flight from Herod. So Jesus, as the promised one of Israel, relives Israel's history, goes down into Egypt and comes out of Egypt, So it's all about, again, kind of this grand, he is the fulfillment of the law, the embodiment of Israel, the grand Messiah, as foretold by Jewish prophecy.
Well, and you mentioned Luke giving the genealogy, and Matthew does too, but they don't agree. Even and right away, like who Joseph's father, Jesus' grandfather.
Right. Yeah.
They start varying right there.
Right. I wouldn't take them as well, and they even disagree about who. One of them traces Jesus is descended from David through Mary, and one of them traces it through Joseph. So do with that what you will. Either way, it's less important. The details are less important. Yet
it seemed important to Luke and Matthew, or the writers of Luke and Matthew.
I would say the details are sort of important, but it's not meant to map out his exact family tree. It's
just to link him to David, basically.
It's to link him to David and to give him place, right? Like, when I first went to Kate's church back home in Alabama, somebody I forget who it was, but somebody at their church asked this question in this deep Southern accent: "Who are your people?" And like that's what those genealogies are trying to establish. Who are Jesus's people? So like towards that end, I think it's Luke's genealogy like lists 4 women, right? And one is a prostitute, one is a foreigner, one is Bathsheba, and one is Tamar. So like, you keep getting this series of like, again, this is Luke saying he's from the underside, right? He's got a foreigner, because that's Ruth. And,
he's not from among the elite.
Right.
Until you get back to David.
Right. Yes.
Which is good.
Yes.
Basically, he's scum like the rest of us.
Right. He is. Right. Yes. So that's overall there.
Okay.
Well,
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because Steve has a question.
Yeah.
And he wants to know, this big momentous occurrence. Why didn't the Magi spread the word when they got back to their home countries? It's like they kept it to themselves.
Right. They kept it to themselves, right? I'll start off by pointing out what I always point out, which is it doesn't say there were only 3 Magi. It says there were 3 gifts, not.
Yeah.
So there could have been 50 of them. Who knows? Or 1.
Like 10 Magi went in on each gift.
Right. Right. Well, part of it is what would they have said at this point, right? I mean, the story's not complete until the death and resurrection, right? So like, what would they have said? Is kind of one question. They're not.
I can imagine, they got back, their spouses would have been like, "Where have you been?"
Right. Where have you been? Right.
You just left with a couple of camels and.
T.S. Eliot does this great poem called "The Journey of the Magi," which it's a funny. This poem itself is a funny story because it was written for this like kids book, but of course T.S. Eliot wrote this incredible meditation on death, and
Yeah.
but it ends on this line that goes, there was a birth certainly, but there also was a death, and then it goes, at home, I will never feel at home here amongst these people and their alien gods, and I think that kind of sums up probably what they were feeling, and that they saw this thing which has literally changed the course of all of creation, and they didn't really have a full explanation of it. It's not like they get an angel telling them the full meaning of this thing. They just get to see it, and I'm sure they went home feeling never again quite at ease, you know, probably always a little bit disturbed in spirit in some way, you know, uncomfortable with, you know, because as T.S. Eliot said, there was a birth, but there was also, you know, with Jesus also comes a death, you know, and a death to everything you're certain about, you know.
Yeah, spreads broad.
Mm-hmm.
Well, given that they were magi would explain a lot about their behavior.
Yeah.
You know, but kings would not. And
Yeah.
Where did the concept that they were kings come from?
I don't remember where. I don't remember which. It was some translation that snuck its way into English. I don't remember which one it was. If it was Tyndale or if it was the King James, one of the two. One of the older, more poetic translations said kings. They're magi, you know, astrologers.
Yeah, and that's why I wonder about that, because a magi is and was such a different thing from a king.
Yes, yeah.
So it just seemed weird that we got that popular conception.
Right. Again, it was, I blame Tyndale or the King James. One of the two.
Well, you could double it up. Which one did the Puritans use? Because then you can have
right.
all
blame
the people you don't like.
Right. Blame the Puritans. Yeah. If only we could work Coca-Cola in there, we'd blame everybody. I would just, it's one of the older English translations. I would just, you know, blame them.
Okay. We'll go with that.
Yeah. And then there's the hymn, which is lovely.
Yeah.
But, you know, the hymn kind of cements it of we three kings of our, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
And it doesn't kind of roll off the tongue, we three magi.
Right.
We three learned
magi
men.
of our, see, it doesn't even, two syllables doesn't even work, you know, so.
See, but that would have been our equivalent of geeks. And
right.
Geeks, again, even historically, aren't getting the credit.
We three-court astrologers, you know, that just doesn't work, right? You know, so.
We three science nerds.
Right.
Yeah, this is a big deal, right? It's enough of a big deal that it attracts these people from a completely different land.
Yeah.
How come nobody in Bethlehem notices? You know, nothing in there talks about anybody in Bethlehem noticing anything odd going on.
It actually does, right? So, but Herod sends in his soldiers in the very next story, right?
Well, what do the people of Bethlehem notice?
Doesn't say the people of Bethlehem notice, but Herod notices, right?
But that's what I mean. You got all the locals who were supposedly right around there. You think they'd notice some star hovering above?
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
If nothing else, it'd be so bright at night, they'd be like,
well,
close the curtains, Enid.
I'm constantly shocked at what people don't notice. You know, like what's literally right in front of your faces. You know, and if you're not looking for it, you don't notice it. You know, I'm just constantly shocked at what never ceases to surprise me.
Yeah.
You know, so who knows what they noticed and what they didn't. You know, again, right after this story, Herod comes through and kills every baby under 2 anyway. You know, so there's a large incentive. We just don't want to talk about that night. Yeah. You know, wasn't a good night.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. Just because I've seen studies of police who are supposed to be trained observers.
Right.
And yet,
what do they miss?
They study,
right?
Yeah, they miss incredible stuff, including like when they're pursuing one person, there can be like a major, blatantly obvious crime going on over here.
They'll totally miss it.
And they completely miss it.
Right. Well, like in psychology, we call this the invisible gorilla experiment, where you.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, where you ask. It's a video of people bouncing a basketball in a circle, and you ask them to count how many times the ball bounces.
Yeah. And
in the middle of it, a guy walks in a gorilla suit right past the camera,
and nobody notices.
And only about 25% of people actually say they notice the guy in the gorilla suit. You know, because what we see is determined by what we're expecting to see. This is why people hit motorcyclists so often. It's because they're literally not expecting to see motorcycles on the road, you know. And so when people say, "Oh, I didn't see him," they're probably being literal. They probably actually didn't, you know. And so why didn't anybody notice anything? I doubt anybody was looking in Bethlehem 2,000, 29 to 30 years ago.
Yeah, it just seems extra odd to me in that case, just because knowing how they live, that like the roof was the main living room.
Yeah.
And often you slept up on the roof.
Yeah.
And so there'd be a lot of stargazing going on, and they don't notice a star. They don't notice thousands of angels.
I mean, they also
singing.
Well, but again, who did right? Like, it doesn't actually say the angels appeared to everybody. It just says it appeared to the shepherds. Maybe these shepherds were the only one.
Had a telepathic channel to the angels.
Yeah, maybe they're the only one who get a preview on the chorus. Just because God is particular, right? This is one of the scandals about God, and so just because the good news is for everybody doesn't mean everybody could hear it.
Would that get back to also the concept that angels aren't physical in this dimension?
Yeah, I mean, whatever they are, right? They vary from the human-like to the very inhuman, and so.
Yeah, the whole "do not be afraid" line being necessary every time they appear.
Right. And they're embodiments of raw holiness, so tends to freak us out.
Raw holiness, freaking us out. I love that line. I got to do something with it. Some historic anomalies.
Yes.
And I know you've joked and chided with me about my obsession with the historical Jesus versus the faith Jesus, but it's who I am. So in that regard, why are there no records of the Star of Bethlehem? We have astrologers, like the Magi, kept very careful records of what they saw. That's part of how we figured out things like Halley's Comet, when supernovae occurred, because the ancients did keep such good records.
Yeah.
Why didn't anybody mention this?
We don't really know what it is. It says star, but right, like what it doesn't actually explain what it is,
So it could have just been some bright object.
Right. Meteor, right? Like, who knows? Alien spacecraft. Right.
I'll go with that one.
Yeah, right. I mean, who time traveling entity? Subspace phenomena in the Star Trek. Like, it never actually says, "Hey, this is a great ball. This is a
great ball of fire."
This is right, or this is a supernova. That or it's a strange eclipse event. Like, we never get any of that. We just get the Star of Bethlehem. We have seen his star rising in the east.
So it could have been a momentary cosmologic phenomenon.
Right.
Localized.
Right. That if you weren't looking at that portion of the sky at that time, you missed it. Okay. We never get an explanation of it. Just that. And who knows? Maybe it's just an angel. That again only the wise men perceived. Right. Who knows what it is. Right.
So we're back to a lot of where my heretical questions come are based in pop culture interpretations.
Yes. I mean, if you think it's... my favorite comic by XKCD is he traces out what the path of the wise men would be if it was like Jupiter or Venus or like a literal like comet, and like it's doing all sorts of curlicues and,
They'd be going in retrograde.
Right, and so... right. I mean, there's the pop culture interpretation, but we never actually get... I would let the text speak for itself, right? It doesn't say... It says the star appeared at his rising and stopped over the place where the child was. It doesn't say more about what it is.
Yeah. And stopping over would imply, A, a very localized event.
Right.
And B, not an actual celestial body, but an angel, an alien spacecraft, whatever.
Right. Fireball, the sky, and
preparing for New Jersey drone attacks.
Right. Swamp gas from Venus. Caught, like, I don't know, like, whatever,
Yeah.
So that's what I would, I would just let the text speak for itself because it doesn't say a lot.
Some of these others may be on that line, so just say, no, that's one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I already have no record of the heavenly hosts. A bigger one, there's no record of the census Luke talks about. Like Augustus never ordered a worldwide.
Right.
And the governor that you mentioned.
Quirinius, he's off by 4 years.
Yeah.
Quirinius.
So the census thing, and I would assume Luke would know that. So why would he go ahead and include something that he knows is historically inaccurate?
Right. There's two different ways you can resolve this conundrum. I leave it up to you. I guess there's three. You can pick one.
Okay.
The first one is the more literalists would say Luke knows something we don't. And so just because we have a lot of Roman records doesn't mean we have all of them.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's whole volumes of Tacitus's histories that are just straight up missing.
Yeah.
So maybe we just don't. Rome was burned several times throughout the centuries.
Yeah.
We just don't have the record of it.
Yeah. But it also doesn't fit Rome's methodology, for example. When they did a census, it was in where you live, not where you were born.
Right. It doesn't fit that. But again, I think it's valid to say he's living closer to the moment than we are.
Yeah.
Is it possible he knows something we don't? Certainly.
Okay. So those are the literalists.
That's the literalist. And they kind of have a point, although I don't think it's essential. But, they might have a point. The second one is just he got off in his history. He just Romans didn't count years by year, but by who was
reigning,
who was consul at the time. Was
Yeah.
actually the year was the year of this person and this person. So he just his eyes got got a little hazy looking at the Excel spreadsheet of where Roman governors line up in the list of council elections, and just got the wrong governor.
And I could see that too, even the wrong calculation, because Roman numerals are not the easiest math to do.
Right, it's not the easiest math. You just got this list of names that line up with this column of names, and if it's a simple mix-up, right?
So an error due to clunkiness,
an error due to clunkiness and record keeping, meh, and there's not a worldwide census, but this is a well-known, ancient historians love to exaggerate, right? And so it's a combination of historical error and prone to exaggeration. It's a local Judean census.
As Renee would say, they introduced drama.
Right. Introduce drama. So those are the two basic ways you can go either route with those. I don't really, I think either way, what Luke is trying to do, is first get Jesus to Bethlehem, and then second, establish this reversal of the hierarchy thing, so we start way up here, but Rome doesn't even know Jesus exists.
So again, we're highlighting that Jesus is
down. He's down here, and also
low-level proletarian.
Right. Yeah. Well, low-level proletariat, but suddenly the whole order of creation has been reversed, and so that low-level proletariat is way up here because Jesus is of them, and it's not Caesar that gets word on. Yeah. It's not Caesar that gets word on his birth, but shepherds, which are kind of like the biker gangs of the ancient world, and and so it's just the lowest of the low get the word.
So there's a lot of ways I'm starting to think that Marx just kind of copied the Bible when he came up with
what?
Karl Marx.
Oh, well,
because he does the same thing.
Right. There's something to be said for that, and so, the term evangelion, right? Gospel, good news. It was a political term in Roman's day. It was a herald would come in announcing evangelion, good news, usually from the emperor, right? The emperor has won a great victory.
So usually it was propaganda.
Right.
For the emperor.
Yeah. The empire has conquered a new province, or the emperor has built a new road, and something like that, right? That was evangelion. That was good news. That was gospel, and so again, this subtle dig that Luke is doing, which is a dig at the empire, but not enough to get his book banned by the censors, is, the angels, what do they announce, right? I have good news, right? Suddenly God is in this business now. But one, God isn't coming to, the whole town, or he's not coming to the powerful cities, he's coming to shepherds outside the fields in Jerusalem, and two, this is good news that Caesar can't possibly
top this.
Can't top this,
yeah.
Right? And again, Roman propaganda at the time was the empire brings peace, right? That's like literally on their
Pax
coin.
Romana,
right? It's literally on their coins, right? The emperor brings peace, and so, but what does the angel say to the shepherds, right? I bring you good news of great joy for all people, peace on earth, and on earth peace, goodwill towards all men, right? It's the emperor is not actually ultimately responsible for peace. God is, because Jesus has entered the world, So it's this great dig at the whole thing is this great dig at Roman propaganda, which is why we start with Augustus and Quirinius and this registration that the Romans do and things like that.
Yeah.
Which is the more important part to kind of grasp.
There's the theological impact of it all.
Right.
We got time for just one more. It's really went fast. We could do at least another episode on this, so maybe after Christmas.
Yeah.
We'll do that when we resume, which is a not so subtle hint to get your questions in too. If you have questions about anything about Christmas. But while we're on this particular topic, it does make you wonder if historically, that the historical Jesus was in fact born in Bethlehem, because both Matthew and Luke see it as important for the nativity to take place in Bethlehem, but they both, how Joseph and Mary are there is different. With, I think it's Luke, they have to travel.
Right.
But in Matthew, they're already there.
Yeah.
So, again.
Yeah, he's a Galilean, right? I mean.
So that's the important part to make it, that he's got to be from Galilee.
Well, he grows up in Galilee. He was born in Bethlehem, right? Is kind of the.
Was that to fulfill the prophecy, though? Does the old prophecy say Bethlehem?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, in multiple. What is it? Malachi, Micah, one of the two. I get them confused. It says, "Out of you, O Bethlehem, shall come." And Bethlehem is where David's from, right? David's from Bethlehem, so Bethlehem is David's city. So the Messiah, who is heir to David's throne, will also come from Bethlehem. The prophet who said that is actually making at the time, the original context of that prophecy is actually money has really just been invented, and like cash currency, and it's like upending the entire Judean economy. And it's resulting in this huge concentration of wealth and power in Jerusalem. The prophet is really I think it's Malachi, but forgive me if I'm wrong, might be Micah, is railing against how the small village is being swallowed up by, the big city, basically.
Because the big city has money.
Right, because the big city has money, and so his prophecy is about how, despite how much money you have and how much power you have, the Messiah is not going to come from you. It's going to come from this little village, which just means house of bread. Basically it's a granary town. Like that's where the Messiah comes from. That's where your king came from. That's where the Messiah will come from again. It's not you.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it doesn't matter whether it's Matthew or Luke. The important thing was that he was born in Bethlehem.
Yes, Bethlehem is, and how you get him there.
Yeah. That, and just quick follow-up on that though, but so how did the economy operate before they learned about cash? Was it everything barter based?
No, it was more like you had like there's a great book called Debt, the First 5,000 Years, which everybody should read, because primitive economies actually aren't barter economies. Their barter economies are actually really advanced economies. And if you think about it, barter only works with somebody you really trust. Like you've actually got to trust somebody to barter with them, right? And so it doesn't make sense that civilization collapses and we go back to bartering, right? So before the invention of hard currency like cash, what people did was they basically kept like numbered accounts on paper in theoretical units, of value, whatever the theoretical unit was, and then somebody said, well, why don't we attach a coin to that theoretical unit of value, and from there you get incredibly wealthy.
So it's like the Assyrians, and where they would have a clay tablet, a clay represented how many bushels of grain your good would have represented.
Right.
Okay.
And then,
and that evolved then into.
And then then eventually somebody got the bright idea. Actually, ancient historians say it's the guy who King Midas is based off of, but that he basically somewhere in Turkey they got the bright idea of
having coins.
Let's have a valuable substance represent that.
What had been grain.
What had been this kind of theoretical measurement on tablet. Let's have they had a lot of electrum, which is a alloy of gold, and so it's like, let's have a electrum coin, represent this theoretical, this theoretical value, and from there, the world spins out of control.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And just to follow up before we go, the name of the book, Debt,
the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber.
All right. We'll have to start doing Amazon recommendations.
Yeah, I know, right? It's a great book. It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, and you're away, right?
I am away next week. So
back in 2 weeks?
Yes.
So the first Sunday of the new year.
Yes.
Right? Cool.
Yes.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Have a good and Merry Christmas, everybody.
What?